Thanks, everyone, and we are glad that you can join us today. So, hello, everyone. Today we'll be discussing investigating and reporting far-right extremism. My name is Paul Adepoji, and I'm the community manager for the ICFJ Pamela Howard Global Crisis Reporting Forum. And today we are talking about a very serious issue that I think is of global relevance. But I'll provide a quick background for you. So far-right extremism has been extensively cited as a major factor in the 2021 United States Capitol attack that sought to overturn the election of Joe Biden in favor of Donald Trump. And the attack ended with 5 deaths that day. About 140 police officers got injured. More than $30 million was spent on repairs and security measures, and there were over 800 criminal charges. And far-right extremism is, of course, not unique to the United States, nor is it new. And the term was actually coined back in 1950s. But today, it is associated with a political preference that leans towards extreme conservatism and white supremacism. And is also paired with conspiratorial rhetoric. And according to an article in the Combating Terrorism Center's journal, The Sentinel, the right-wing extremists today, in many cases, they no longer subscribe to the narrow concept of nationalism, but instead imagine themselves as participants in a global struggle against global enemy. Paraphrasing that article, he said, consequently, networking and cooperating across borders is seen as a necessity, and that is according to the author Yassin Musharbash. And we are hosting Yassin today, and for this webinar, and I'd like to say, how are you doing, Yassin? And thanks for joining us today.
No problem, and I'm very well. Thank you very much for having me.
Yeah, so at the end of today, we hope our journalists will learn how to investigate the far right with a focus on globalization, and you also know how to plan an investigation, and you know what does an ideal team look like, and what reporting methods should be used. And you also have an idea of how to navigate the process of data mining, interviews, background meetings, identifying informants, and getting them to talk to you, including relying on court proceedings, in addition to keeping yourself safe. And so today, I'm really excited that we are having this conversation, and our expert, our panelist today started working as a journalist while he was still at the university, and from 2004 to 2012 he worked for Spiegel. In 2012 he started working for DZ, and which is Germany's largest weekly newspaper, where he has risen to become deputy head of the investigations department. His area of expertise include jihad and political extremism. So you agree with me that we are in the right hands today to navigate this highly delicate, sensitive, critical, but equally important subject. So if you are watching us on Facebook live stream, and we also thank you for joining us today, and you can actively engage with us using the comment box below the video you are watching. And if you are joining us on the Zoom platform, as usual, I'm always interested in knowing where you are joining us from today, so that our speaker can have an idea of which region you are joining us from. So please use the chat box to tell us where you are joining us from, and we are glad that you're able to join us today. And without wasting much time, and I would like to hand over the discussion to Yassin, and after his brief presentation, I will now come with the question and answers. So how are you doing? And the floor is yours.
Sorry?
Yes, I said the floor is yours, and yes, I would like you to start the conversation,
Okay.
and
Yeah,
then I will
sure.
now engage you. Yes.
Okay. Well, maybe I should start by telling you a little bit about the story that we wrote that got Paul and Stella interested in connecting with me. At the site, we have the luxury of being able to publish very long reads. So every week we publish one story that gets three, entire newspaper pages of a very large newspaper. So that's a very, very long feature that you can write there. And we at the investigative department of the paper quite often get to write this particular long story. So the story that we wrote about the globalization of the far right was one of those pieces that was run in that section of our newspaper. And the idea that we had started, or the idea that we turned into this article started with an op-ed that I had read in the New York Times. And in the New York Times, a terrorism expert and the US congressman had written an article saying that they believe that the battlefield in Ukraine had become an international magnet for far-right extremist foreign fighters, and that the problem was already of the same dimension, if not bigger, than the problem of jihadists gathering in Afghanistan in the 1980s. So that's what spiked my interest, because I'm really a jihadism expert. That's what I've been working on for almost 24, 25 years. And I know a lot about, the jihadists gathering in Afghanistan in the 1980s, and I knew what came, from that, namely Al-Qaeda and everything that came after. So after I read this article, I kind of thought, is this true? Is there so many foreign fighters of the far right that went to Ukraine and then networked there and got to know each other and exchanged ideas and training and best practices? And if so, that's very concerning. So I convinced a number of people in our team to enter into this investigation. And so our basic idea was, or our basic question was, is there such a thing as a really tenable, viable, palpable globalization of far-right extremists? And what does it mean? And can we observe it in action? Can we actually identify people in the process of networking? Because we did not want to write, a purely analytical piece. We wanted to show that this is really happening, if it is happening. So that was our starting point. And we looked at Ukraine and we realized, yes, there is a large number of foreign fighters, or there was, at least for a time, namely right after 2014. There probably were as many as 17,000 foreign fighters from all across the world, most of them from Europe. But there were Americans there. There were people from other parts of the world there. And after we started looking into that and trying to find stories about and reports about what some of them did after they returned from the battlefield, we started to realize, okay, this is a big problem. Because there were, for example, cases in Italy where returnees from the battlefield in Ukraine had been arrested by the police after they started hoarding massive amounts of explosives. So what did they have in mind? What were they planning to do? And there were other similar cases all across Europe where we suddenly realized, wow, there's a bunch of people who had been in Ukraine, who have met with other foreign fighters of the far right, and then returned to their home countries and apparently started plotting attacks. So that is, very similar to some of the stuff that happened in Afghanistan. So our interest was piqued, and we started to look at cases and at driving forces and at organizations and networks, and asked ourselves, how can we find these people? How can we find out what they're up to? So that was our one entry point. The other entry point that we always had in the back of our mind was, of course, that we knew that a lot of far-right extremist terrorist perpetrators have been referencing each other across countries and across continents. So, you're all aware of the terrorist attack in Christchurch, for example, against 2 mosques. And the perpetrator of those attacks referenced Anders Behring Breivik in Norway, who had attacked Muslims. There was a case in Germany where a far-right terrorist attacked a Jewish synagogue and killed a Turkish migrant worker in Germany. And he also referenced the Christchurch attacker. And then there have been terrorist cases in the United States where they referenced all 3 of them or 2 of them. So, this was our second entry point, that we knew that in this whole realm of lone shooter terrorists on the far right. There's an ideological connection that ties them all together. So those were the two avenues that we started to follow. So one of our first questions was, again, which organizations are instrumental in, making it easy for neo-Nazis, for far-right extremists to network? And one of the groups that we identified very early was the Russian Imperial movement. And the Russian Imperial movement is an organization that has been around for quite a while, and they can be described as ultra-Orthodox in the Christian Orthodox sense, as ultra-nationalist in a Russian sense, as white supremacists in the global sense. And this organization is important. It's based in St. Petersburg. It's important because the Russian state is not interested in curbing them in any way whatsoever. So they're basically free to do whatever they want. And they are important also because they're very much hands-on. So in St. Petersburg, we found out that they run a paramilitary training camp where you can book courses and basically be trained as if you were a soldier. And a lot of the training that you can get there is the kind of training that is forbidden in most of the rest of Europe, even, well, I'm not sure about the United States, but I would think in many, many other countries too, because they get to use weapons that you can't possibly get your hands on in most parts of Western Europe. You're being trained by actual veterans of wars, by actual Russian soldiers who have been in wars, etc., etc. So it's a very serious thing. And we started to look into this, and we realized there have been far-right extremists from all over Europe and all over the West who have gone there to train with the Russian Imperial movement. And the Russian Imperial movement had also dispatched a couple of their own fighters to fight in Ukraine on the Russian side in 2014 and 15. So there was a very real connection there to actual warfare and the battlefield. And when we looked at, who are the guys who are going there, we discovered right-wing extremists from Sweden, from Italy, from the Balkans, from Germany. So all sorts of people who went there for training. We also realized that there was a connection between the Russian Imperial movement and far-right extremist groups in the United States of America. And that really surprised us because, we were not aware of that. On the United States end of the story, we found Matthew Heimbach, who used to be a very important leader in the neo-Nazi movement in the United States. And he had actually invited a delegation of the Russian Imperial movement to the United States a couple years prior. And there was footage of that, and there were pictures of that. And so we contacted both. We contacted the Russian Imperial movement and we contacted Matthew Heimbach. And, we were able to speak to both of them. So one of our reporters met Heimbach in Tennessee in the United States, and another of our reporters met the head of the military or paramilitary training unit of the Russian Imperial movement in Russia. And we spoke to both of them for quite some time about what is it that they believe and why is it important for them to connect. And this is when we got our first sense of the ideological underpinning that is absolutely vital for the kind of globalization that we are describing in our article, namely that these people believe there's a global fight in which, you could describe it as a global civil war. This is how they look at the world. They believe that there's a global civil war going on between the right and the left, and the right in that case is, white people who share their beliefs, and the other side is, everybody who's not white, Jews, homosexuals, liberals, you name it. So, both sides are not, they are not distinguished as clearly as you would sometimes think that neo-Nazis see the world. But on the other hand, there's a sense of global unity between these people who identify with, one side of this conflict. And so we learned, through these interviews that, the times where the far right was basically a nationalist enterprise are over. Borders of nations, state borders don't matter anymore. So, when 10 years ago or 15 years ago, a Polish neo-Nazi and a German neo-Nazi would probably hit each other over the head because the one is a German nationalist and the other one is a Polish nationalist. Now, in these new times, they would probably start to form an alliance because they got a common enemy on a global scale. And this was the key for us to understand these kinds of networks. So, starting from this, we then looked into all kinds of other organizations and realized that it's, wherever you look, this is really happening. This is what's going on. So just to give you an idea of the other kinds of alliances or networks that we came across. One is, for example, the whole nexus between originally American neo-Nazi organizations like Atomwaffendivision and the Siege network and an organization called The Base. They were originally American organizations who've all started to branch out, and they actually have affiliate groups in places, in the case of The Base, in places as far away as the Netherlands, Germany, the Baltic states, Scandinavia, Australia, South Africa. So this is truly a global network. It's not a huge organization. We're only talking about, a couple of dozens, maybe 100 operatives. But these are people who are highly militant, who I would actually call, wannabe terrorists in waiting. And they have formed global networks based on the idea that I have outlined before, that there's a global civil war going on, and they need to prepare, they need to fight back against what they perceive as an onslaught of liberals, Jews, homosexuals, and you name it. So in the process of this, I'm sorry, and I should mention one other network because it's very instrumental as well, and because it also puts another highlight on the importance of the conflict in Ukraine. I mentioned that the Russian imperialist movement was fighting on the Russian side, but there were many neo-Nazis fighting on the Ukrainian side as well. They were organized, or they were drawn to the conflict by the Azov network, which is a political network that grew out of the original Azov Battalion, of which you probably have heard a lot in the news recently because they are the last defenders of the city of Mariupol in Ukraine today. But then back in the day, in 2014, that was a very right-wing organization, and they, organized a political organization grew out of them. And this political organization was recruiting fighters actively for the war in Ukraine for a long, long time. So we identified one of their female recruiters who went to Germany at least 7 times that we know of, where she actively recruited people for the cause to come to Ukraine. And in Germany, we identified one young German neo-Nazi who wanted to fight in Ukraine. And in order to be allowed to go there, did all sorts of jobs for this Ukrainian network in Germany. Among his jobs, was international networking. So wherever we look, we found that this is happening, and there are examples for that, and people are doing it while we are looking at them. So what we did was then, and I'm just going to talk very briefly about methods because I've already mentioned interviews, but there were quite a few court cases that we followed because we had heard, or we were hoping to see more about international connections in these particular court cases, and in many cases we actually did come across these international connections. So there was a court case in the Netherlands, for example, where 2 neo-Nazis were put on trial also because they had connections to the US-based network, The Base. We found out in a German court case about how one young German neo-Nazi was radicalized on the internet and tried to get recruited into Atomwaffendivision. We were able to describe how another German guy made his way not only online into The Base, but actually traveled to the United States to train with these neo-Nazis in the United States. So court cases, visiting court cases, going through the documents was also very instrumental in this case. Another thing that we did and we needed to do was had to do with data mining, because we managed to get our hands on a pretty giant leak of internal chats from Atomwaffendivision in the United States. And we digitalized all of that and made it searchable, and combed through it with a very, very fine comb to find traces of international connections there. And we found connections to Germany. So data mining, also very important. And one other thing that was instrumental, and one particularly interesting aspect, the case of the young German guy who worked on behalf of Ukrainian neo-Nazis and helped them recruit. That protagonist of our story, we could only identify and interview because one of my colleagues very, very, very diligently and for weeks on end tried to track the boy down through social media, through a social media investigation. And once he had identified him, of course, it was very, very important to get him to talk to us. And that brings me to the point of safety. Lastly, because when you meet with these people, of course, you have no guarantee what's going to happen. So, when my colleague Christian Fuchs met with this German neo-Nazi who had worked with the Ukrainian neo-Nazis, that boy insisted, or young man insisted, that they go for a walk in the mountains alone. And that, of course, presented a bit of a security challenge because, we wanted to make sure our reporter was safe. And so we had a security protocol in place. And, he checked in every 30 minutes. And he sent us a signal that he was okay. And so, fortunately, all went well. So, and when we tied it all together, I think that we actually could, fill some of these theories that we had developed along the way. We could fill them with actual examples from the real world of, actual people who did the networking hands-on, and we were able to, reconstruct the way they did it. So I do think that our investigation helped the understanding of these processes along, but that, of course, is for the reader to judge. So I'll leave it at that, and hope that I've painted a bit of a picture of how we went about it.
Thank you very much for that, and I think it's a lot to take in, and I'm going to start this dialogue with where Ali Afridi mentioned, which is trying to connect the origin of far-right extremism. So, when there are many schools of thoughts, when there are many parts to this issue, journalists are not researchers, and the way journalists would operate will be largely limited to the resources and the information within them. But unlike other issues, this issue of extremism seems to be really, really critical, and any attempt to focus on what you are only having access to may seem to be ignoring the fuller picture. So how do you try as much as possible to ensure balance in your reporting and ensuring you have fair access to everyone, even though you are limited by access?
Yes, I mean that is a problem that I'm well aware of, because I've been covering terrorism for quite a long time, and it's there's always the question of who can you believe, who can you trust, who's trying to tell you lies, and who's neutral in all of this. And of course, I mean, when we enter into an investigation like this, and I mean, I should mention that very, very luckily, we at Decide have at our disposal, a large team. I mean, there was, I think, 6 people from inside Decide plus 3 independent reporters that we hired to do for certain tasks. So we were quite a large group of people. But when we enter into an investigation like this, the first thing we do is we all read a ton. You know, we all read a lot of background material, we read academic studies, we talk to experts. So we try to, you know, build a basis of knowledge on which we then build. Because the particular case that will become part of your story it is only possible to understand this case, you know, after you've built a basis of understanding of the problem as such. And I think, I mean, I believe that if you spend 2 weeks reading academic articles and reports by expert methods on the issue, you have a pretty good understanding of what the mainstream is, what the fundamental interpretation of the problem is. So then you are somewhat competent, I think, to understand what it is that you are then looking at. When you meet with, when you interview people like a neo-Nazi, of course you have to take everything with a grain of salt. You know, of course you have to try and verify everything he tells you. Of course you have to, always be aware of the fact that he is a party in this, and his job is not to give the best and complete information to reporters. But that can't let you, that can't be a reason not to talk to them. You still have to talk to them, and then you have to take whatever they tell you and try to check it, try to see if it all checks out, try to find a second source. And if you can't find the second source, which, quite often is the case, you have to signal that in your text. You have to say, this is what he said, we can't corroborate that. But it makes sense because there's another case where it was similar, or, you have to somehow, establish some frame of reference, because you don't want to be gullible. You have to make sure that you can't just put in your paper one-on-one what people tell you. That's never possible. You shouldn't do that, of course. So verification is always a big part of the job, and we spent quite some time with that.
Yeah, thank you. So regarding anytime this issue of far-right extremism and ways of thinking comes up, and the way it is presented as something that is really, really serious, especially the language of extremism, makes me really wonder how comfortable a journalist can be to be able to really approach these kinds of interviews and still be able to feel safe. But anytime I think that is not possible, my mind goes to this really, really interesting guy, Jordan Klepper, who has been able to know how to not just interview some far-right opinionists, but he's also actually able to get them to laugh and get jokes out of them and still be able to present their views. I really wish I can share the audios of this. Is really one of the interviews that I think really shows how people can actually go, and it's really, really. Let me know if your audio is. Can you hear the video?
No, I'm sorry, I can't hear it.
Oh, it's really, really fascinating how people that they are what they are saying is really, really, they see the media as a threat, but still are still comfortable to talk to you. It still means there is some level of trust that they have in the person that makes the person to feel safe and for them to still be willing to talk to you. How do you achieve that?
Well, that's a very good question, and I think I have at least a bit of an answer to that. And this is basically drawn from my experience in covering jihadists, but it's the same problem. I think that these extremists generally are willing to talk to you if they can tell that you are actually interested and that you have done your homework before talking to them. So, when I talk to a jihadist and he can see that I have read his books, he will talk to me very differently. And it's the same experience that we had, interviewing James Mason, for example, in the United States, who's somewhat, he's like the godfather of neo-Nazis in the United States. And, his writings are responsible for, the globalization of his ideology. And when our reporter went there, I mean, he basically knocked on his door and said, I'm a reporter, can I talk to you? There's stuff we want to understand. Help us understand it, because you've written these books. Is this what you wanted? And, but he knew that we were serious about this. We did our homework. And I think this is, I don't do this to make, neo-Nazis feel good. Personally, I don't care about them. I despise them. But as a journalist, I think it is a question of self-respect that I need to be prepared for any interview that I do, even if it's with a nice guy that I like, So, extremists understand this too. They will know if you're serious or not. They will, and the more serious they believe you are, the more they will trust you not to bend their words when you write your article, So I think this is part of the recipe. That's very important for me anyway. I always tell my people, we always tell each other, never go into an interview like that unprepared. You have to know what the guy has said. You have to know what he's read, what he's written, ideally also what he's read.
Yeah, thank you. I think I've been able to fix. We have lots of questions, so I'm really happy you did not go along with you. But I really want to also get us in the minds of those that are on the forefront. Now, racism is still one of the ideal issues of extremism. And some time ago, I saw this report on inside America's last only white church, and it
This may look like an average religious gathering, but this is no ordinary church service. This is the Assertree Folk Assembly, known simply as the AFA, a fringe heathen group that mandates their members have Northern European heritage, a whites-only church in 21st century America. They represent a disturbing trend in contemporary white nationalism, the co-opting of heathen symbols and myths to promote racial purity and fears of a white genocide.
We must secure the existence of our people and a future for white children.
I'm on a journey to understand how this group is gaining influence across the country.
So the requirements to be part of the Assertree Folk Assembly, you do have to be of Native European descent.
They say they're good people, so I'm going to take their word for it.
And to meet the anti-racist heathens who are fighting to reclaim their religion from extremists.
I'm doing everything that I...
Now, why am I really about this? Does it really matter if, or that seems, this is not just the first of this kind of video that I will watch, and the journalists that will do the report could actually be one of the individuals that those kinds of settings are against. In this case, we have a black female journalist going into what seems to be America's last only white church. Is that okay? And if we want to look at it, whether that issue is actually at the focus or it directly affects that particular journalist, does it risk of safety or exploitation? And is it normal? And does it add any color to that kinds of reporting?
Well, I find it very difficult to comment on an excerpt of, I haven't seen the whole thing and I don't know anything about that colleague. So, but generally speaking, I'd look at this from a purely professional perspective, or I try to. So we are journalists, far and foremost. This is our first identity, I think, in approaching any subject. I don't think it should make a difference who you are personally. It can be an advantage and it can be a disadvantage sometimes. But I tell you what, I come from a very weird background. I'm half Arab, which I don't look, but I got an Arabic name. And also I come from a Christian Arabic family, but my name is Muslim. So I confuse people all the time. I'm used to this. And, I've seen the advantages, I've seen the disadvantages, but I've also seen when I thought what would be an advantage turned into a disadvantage and the other way around. So, I think the safest thing is to look at this as a professional issue and not play on what, some people would think are advantages or disadvantages. There are tactical moves, of course, to be quite honest, in an investigation like the one that I've described. For example, when we approached the Russian Imperial movement in Russia, it was quite clear that it would probably be difficult for one of us not speaking Russian to show up there and get a good interview with a translator. I mean, it could still work, but we decided to rely on the services of a Russian colleague, and said we contacted him. We knew he was a trustworthy colleague, and we contacted him and said, "Do you think you can get there? Do you think you can get this interview and do it for us?" And so he called around and spoke to a few people, and he said, "Yes, I can get the interview. What do you want to know?" So I sat down with him and we discussed, what we want, and I gave him, I think, 40 or 50 questions, and he did the interview for us, and that worked quite nicely. But yeah, generally speaking, I personally don't waste too much time on who of the reporters has what particular background. So yeah, I hope this answers your question.
Okay, yeah, very good. So which simply means for journalists that are thinking probably there are some restrictions. I think from what Yassin has said, it's not really about probably you as a journalist. It's about the story and your ability to deliver um, what is expected. Do I paraphrase that really well?
Yeah, I suppose. Well, I would just put it differently. I mean, I've seen, one of my favorite colleagues in the world is a female Arab journalist who does badass reporting in jihadist circles. Even though most people say, "How can she do that? She's a woman." Well, she can. I don't know how, but she can.
I love that.
Yeah, and that's what I'm interested in,
Yeah, okay. So I think since I've sorted out the voice thing. So I will go back to that video I wanted to show initially to show you how comfortable this guy is when he's actually interviewing people that has all these alternative perspectives on this. So,
been to a Trump rally before?
No, sir.
What are your expectations?
Truth.
Truth. At a Trump rally?
Yeah.
Good luck.
Barack Obama had a big part of 9/11.
Which part?
Not being around, always on vacation, never in the office.
Why do you think Barack Obama wasn't in the Oval Office on 9/11?
That I don't know. Would like to get to the bottom.
The way he's able to keep a straight face, not just that, they still trust him to still be able to communicate. I think is something that is really, really worthy. So let's go to, the point from all our conversation is really, really, it's still journalism. You still have to be able to get your facts right. You still have to be able to do your research, like Yassin has said. You have to be able to be intentional and still be a journalist, even though this is a very sensitive topic. So the first question I would like to take, I think is probably from Facebook, is this: where is the balance between reporting on extremists, i.e. getting their right to respond, and the danger of sharing their point of views more widely?
Okay. Well, again, so fascinating for me because many of the problems that come up are discussion points that I have experienced covering jihadism in the past already. Well, I think as journalists, we have an obligation to the public. And this obligation is that we have to allow the public to reach a state where they can form opinions and take decisions for themselves. We don't take it for them. They need to know what's happening in the world. We are telling them as best we can, but we are not the ones censoring them. I don't do that. I think that there's a bigger danger not writing about things because they could, because that way I'm spreading a message as opposed to not writing about it. I think not writing about it, trying to keep it a secret, trying to keep it under the blanket is the bigger secret. And it's also, I can't reconcile that with my job. If it's news, and I'm going to report about it. The question is always, how do I report about it? Do I do it professionally? And I think that, I have been writing about extremists for a long time, and I don't think anybody would ever, look at my articles and say, you helped Al-Qaeda, or you helped ISIS, or you helped Nazis, because I wrote about what they believe. No, it is possible to write about what these people believe without, that helping them get recruits. Quite the opposite. It helps raise awareness of how big the problem is. It helps raise awareness of how easy it is for them to recruit other people if you don't know their arguments. So I think that we have a role there. And as a journalist, again, this is back to professionalism. If it's news, I'm going to report it, but I'm going to do it well if I can, and that's all the difference, I think.
Yeah, okay. Let's also go to the issue of let's go back to the issue of safety. Is a
Yeah,
recurring rhetoric. And so, what are your tips on safety when doing these kinds of reporting? Did you
yeah.
at any point worry about your reporters being attacked or threatened? And you can also share insights from other
Mm.
experiences that you're aware of.
In all honesty, I have to say that in this particular investigation, I think the there were 3 points where I was a little concerned. One was the interview I already talked about when my colleague Christian Fuchs met with this guy with the Ukrainian connection, and he insisted on going for a walk. And my colleague is a very, very experienced reporter. He's been covering neo-Nazis for a long, long time. And before he asked for the interview, he had spoken with lots of people from his family, former friends. So he had a pretty good idea of the personality of the guy. And he had already spoken to him on the phone, I think, several times before they agreed to meet in person. So I asked him, I said, do you feel okay with this? Do you want to do this? And he said, yes, I don't have problems at all. I'm very happy to do it. I don't think anything's going to happen. Because, and I should have said that before, but I need to clarify that now. Because this particular young person said to us, and we believe now, a year later, that it is actually true, that he's in the process of de-radicalizing. So he was not interested in going to Ukraine anymore as a fighter. He wanted to leave radicalism behind. This is what he told us, and Christian believed him, that he was, now these processes take a time. Just because somebody says that doesn't mean it's true, or it doesn't happen overnight. But we had reason to believe that he was probably actually trying to make us understand what happened. So again, we had a security protocol, and this is what happens a lot of times. You make sure you always know where your reporter is. You always, you agree on a certain pattern of notification. In this case, I think, like I said, every 30 minutes, I wanted a text message by my friend. There's a code word in place if anything goes, anything becomes problematic. And the guy on the other hand of the security protocol always also knows where the next police station is, just in case. So this is what we had in place in that particular situation. The other two situations were the interview in Russia with the head of the Russian imperialist movement. But in that case, the Russian colleague said he was very confident, also because the guy is basically running a business. So he's not interested in murdering somebody on his own premises. That probably wouldn't look too good. And then James Mason, the interview with James Mason, the godfather of American neo-Nazism in Denver, with no prior appointment. But in this case, the guy who did the interview was my boss. So I was fine with that. He's more experienced than I am. And so that was cool. So there are other cases, of course, where you have to be very careful. And this colleague that I already mentioned, Christian Fuchs, he's knocked on so many doors of neo-Nazi terrorists. I don't even know how many. But he usually takes somebody along. So at least we try to be two people at any given moment. And again, security protocol is always in place in cases like that. And we always, our first rule is don't take unnecessary risks. So if you feel that this could escalate, if you feel that there's danger, for example, if you see that the guy's drunk, come back the next day, don't force your way in if you feel unsafe. So we try to minimize risk.
Okay.
Of course, we are still being threatened, we are being sued and all of that. And, other people have bigger problems than us, but it happens to us too. And this is going to be the last thing I say about this or in this regard, but it's important, I think, that real journalism will never be 100% risk-free. So we are willing to accept that, there is a hopefully very slow, very low percentage of risk involved in the job that we do, but it is there, and we accept that because these are not nice people.
Personally, do you think freelance journalists can thrive in this line of reporting?
Well, about freelance journalists, I mean, there are excellent investigative freelance journalists around and extremism experts around in journalism. But I have to say, I enjoy working in large teams, and it's a privilege. I know that, I understand that. We have very often, in many occasions, worked together with freelance reporters, for a while, for a particular investigation, and that I have very good experiences with that sort of agreement. But I know it's very hard to do this work by your own, on your own, and to get paid for it in a way that actually makes it worth, because investigations of this kind take a long time. So who's going to, if you get paid for an article, but you've worked for months on the story, you're not going to be able to live on that. So, I have the deepest respect for independent journalists who do this kind of reporting. From my experience, I'd say, if you're interested, try to approach large newsrooms for a cooperation. Maybe that suits your purposes better sometimes and helps both sides.
Okay, we have a question from Elizabeth Thompson, who is joining us from Ottawa in Canada. So Elizabeth writes, did you also monitor social media groups on platforms like Telegram? Are there particular ones where they come together?
Yes, we did. We did look into Telegram chats and Telegram channels, also other media, other social media platforms that play a role in this regard. There are certain places where they hang out. These places change all the time, and it's very difficult to keep track of that. My colleague Astrid, she was instrumental in covering that part of our investigation. If you want to get in touch with her, I can organize that, but I can't, and I won't name off the top of my head now, Atomwaffendivision Telegram channels. That I don't think that makes sense. But yes, these channels do exist.
Yeah, then in terms of journalists being able to comprehensively report on these issues, where do you still think journalists are still lagging behind and still struggling to play catch up?
Sorry, where do journalists struggle?
In which aspect do you still think journalists are still lagging behind in being able to keep up with these, such that they are trying to play catch up?
Yeah, I think it's a very good question. I think there has been, well, actually, I think it's actually almost more a question of quantity than of quality. I think there's been excellent reporting on far-right extremism across the board. I mean, look at the Pulitzer Prize-winning reportage of the Washington Post about January 6th in the United States. It was excellent reporting, and there's excellent reporting in a number of countries on this. I think it's not enough. I think there's always certain dynamics. For 15 years, for 10 years, nobody wanted to hear extremism stories about anything other than Islamist terrorism. Now, and completely rightly, people are more, looking more at right-wing extremism because, look at what happened in the United States in the last week alone. And these people kill all the time, they're dangerous, and we need more reporting about that. And I think the reporting that we have is mostly good. We probably just need more about it.
Yeah, I agree with you. Probably these will be the two last questions. The first question is a lot of these groups are finding transnational alliances via the internet, which is helpful for journalists and law enforcement investigating and tracking these groups. Do you believe government or corporate policies monitoring and censoring these groups are putting any dent to stopping them?
That's a very interesting debate. Again, a debate that I know from jihadism as well. You know, if you shut down all the groups, will you end the problem? I don't think you will. I don't think you will. I don't think you can. I think it's very important to have a good eye to monitor, to have a good eye on these chat rooms and forums and billboards. I think it's important to monitor them, but I think it is important for journalists to do this as well, and not only for security institutions. I don't like to do the job of security institutions. They have a purpose. Our job is to control them. We can't rely on them to help us in our reporting. We have to do this ourselves. Do I wish it was more difficult for these people to connect on the internet? Yes, but I also know that if they want to connect, they're going to find ways, and they will be meeting online in places that I cannot find. So I prefer them to meet in places that I can find for the time being.
Okay. This question also came in. How do you report on groups like the Taliban that their ideology is based on their ethnicity and religion, such that you will not be standing against their ethnicity?
Sorry, the last bit I didn't get.
Such that you will not be standing against their ethnicity.
Okay, so how do I report about groups like the Taliban?
Yes, what are your how should journalists report on groups like Taliban that their ideology is based on their ethnicity and religion, such that it will not appear as if your reporting is attacking their ethnicity?
So if I report, sorry, I don't get the question. If I report about them, I will further their cause, or I will have a problem as a reporter?
No, the question is this. Probably it will be as if, so that it will not be as if you are attacking their race and not just what they are doing. I think that the person is talking about drawing the lines between reporting on what a group like Taliban is doing and the part, so that it's not associated with the part of the world where the group is majorly located.
Okay, I'm not entirely sure I understand the question, but what I think is important, and I hope this helps in answering. Yes, okay, I'm reading this. He suggested the Taliban's ideology is based on their ethnicity. Well, there's a big overlap between the Taliban's ideology and a certain ethnicity. I mean, that's true for many groups in many places of the earth. And if I report about them, and that's part of the story, obviously, and I don't think so. Generally speaking, very broadly, very generally speaking, this is a complicated world in which we live. But as journalists, we cannot never, ever be afraid of complexity. Complexity is there for us to break down as good as we can do it, as well as we can do it. So, we can never run away from anything because it's a complicated story. The Taliban is a complicated story. So it needs to be a long story that you write about them. It needs to be well researched. You need to talk to lots of people, and then you have to write it very well, but it can be done. So very generally speaking, I think that's what my answer would be. If you do your work diligently and professionally, it almost always solves many of these problems. Do I further their cause? Do I emanate their propaganda? Do I do their work for them? No, no, and no. If there are professional ways to write about extremism without it turning into propaganda.
Yes, and as we wrap up, what do you think the take-home message for today should be for journalists that are on the call today?
I would hope that the takeaway message is that if I don't want this to sound too pathetic or too cheesy, but if they collaborate across borders, we should do it as well. We should do it better. We are journalists. We speak the same professional language. If the problem is a global problem, our answer should be a global investigation whenever that's possible. So, if it's great if you do this on your own. It's probably better if we all work together. So that would be my takeaway message.
Yes, so thank you very much, and we are really glad that you can join us. Then, in case you're on this call and you would like to get any further, get in contact with Yassin or get any kind of support regarding
I'll
this
write
kinds of
my email
issues,
address into the
yes,
chat.
please. Yes, please put it there. And I'll also put mine there so that we can further help you in wherever you are doing, and we can guide you and ensure that you're able to get going. And this is an ongoing conversation that is unending, and we hope that this session has inspired you to be able to do that. And we would like to hear more from you regarding this issue and other issues. Would also like to know how programming has impacted your reporting in one way or the other. So we have a survey that we are currently conducting, through which you can actually get your opinions across to us, and we can also put this into consideration in designing our further programs. And if you look at the chat box, I've put a link there that takes you to a quick survey. Please, before you go, click on the link, let us know your opinions on these issues, and we'll be glad. And if you'd like to know more about the ICFJ's Global Crisis Reporting Forum, please visit www.icfj.org, and you'll know more about us. We also encourage you to be part of our Facebook community, where we share resources and insights and other information. We think that would be really, really important. We are on Facebook, and I would like you to be part of our world. Instead of searching, I've put the link directly in the chat box. You can be part of our Facebook community, and we'll be happy that you are able to be part of us. And we also have a lot of resources for you via the HygieNet initiative. So please visit HygieNet's website on www.hygienet.org. Once again, I really wanted to help get across to us regarding that survey. It's really, really important. It's what we do to really improve our offerings, how you get back to us, and we are glad that you've been there. So thank you very much, Yassin. Thank you very much, everyone that is on this call. And from me and the entire CFJ team, we say have a great day and bye for now.
Bye-bye. Thanks for having me.